What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. So for those of you who are looking to go tiny, you're looking to live in a community, you're also concerned about the space around your tiny home. So today, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a tiny house homesteading community. We're talking to Steve of Big Calm Tiny. I'm super excited if y'all learn from Steve, learn about homesteading, and learn about this new tiny house community model that focuses on the area outside of your home. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Let's get into it. Let's talk about Big Calm Tiny Homestead. All right, I am here today with Steve. Steve is the owner of Big Calm Tiny Homestead. Steve, thank you so much for being on the channel. I'm super excited for people to hear about you and everything that you're doing. If you don't mind just taking a second to just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what got you interested in tiny homes, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, great to be here, Mick. Thank you. The journey actually didn't start with tiny houses. My wife Abby and I, we were both interested in living rural and both really curious about earthships, which are kind of whole system type, unique in-ground housing. And through those forums, we learned about rammed earth and other modular builds, and of course, tiny houses on wheels kept popping up in there. So our inspiration actually came more from finding the land and then connecting the dots with some of the curiosities that we'd found in those forums around innovative new housing.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool. I feel like that's a really like roundabout way to end up in the tiny house space. So what made you decide to start Big Calm Tiny then?
Well, we were looking for property. We wanted to move out of the city, kind of recalibrate our lives. We both work digitally, and we're putting in a lot of time at the screen, and wanted to also get our hands dirty in the garden and kind of rebuild some of those muscles around manual work or just outdoor time. And so we were looking for property and found this really beautiful parcel that has become Big Calm. It's about 37 acres. It's in interior BC, British Columbia, in a really quiet valley called the Slocan Valley. And it just kind of spoke to us that this is a really beautiful piece of land. The topography works really well, perhaps for a community, and it's unzoned. So that led us kind of down the path of thinking, a community would fit really well here. It's a great layout for a pocket neighborhood. There's a lot of people, from what we could tell, a lot of people looking for spacious, attractive places to park their tiny houses on wheels, and really not able to find that, something that wasn't a back alley or a parking lot or a campground. So something kind of new and different in that space, and that's the tiny homesteads.
That's awesome. No, I think that makes sense. I think you're completely spot on. Like, people are definitely looking for just like more land, but they still want to connect with people. So they don't necessarily want to be on a piece of land in the middle of nowhere by themselves, but they would like to be on a piece of land in the middle of nowhere with like 10 or 15 or 20 other people. So I think that makes a complete sense. For those who are not familiar, I know the word homestead has been, people have heard of it before, but most people don't know what a homestead really is. Do you mind talking a little bit about what a homestead is and like permaculture? Because I know that's something that you've mentioned before too.
Yeah. Well, homestead really, in our context, is just that additional space. So we find it really important, given that all the attention tends to be around the clever use of space within a house, building different storage nooks and, accentuating, as much of the living space within the tiny house as possible. That it's kind of overlooked that the edge around the house is also important too. And so we wanted to really play up the aspect that, there's acres of space here, and it's in a very nice natural spot, and that's also part of your home as well. So that's the homestead outside of your steps. And we call ourselves a permaculture guided tiny homestead community, and the permaculture piece is really drawing on the whole field of permaculture, which is kind of being an apprentice to Mother Nature. It's working with whole systems and sustainability or self-sufficiency pieces, but really figuring out where to live and how to live within the context of the topography and where the water flows, where the wind blows, and factoring those into the decisions of where we put things like trails or a greenhouse or the houses themselves, and kind of, stacking functions, that you've got a house, but it's also perhaps got solar exposure. It's close to a garden, all of those sorts of things. And there's a really big movement, especially in the last couple of years, around regenerative living and regenerative villages that are looking to really have that kind of symbiotic relationship with the land, with the space that you live at.
Okay, that makes sense. I think there's like a, obviously like a knowledge piece that comes with that too, because you have to take the time to learn about, what makes the most sense in terms of where, you put the tiny homes or like, the garden and that sort of thing too. So I feel like there's a lot for people to learn in terms of being a part of a homestead, especially one that has that sort of approach. So I see where that's something that, you all gravitated towards. Definitely fits with what you're saying with sort of getting off the screen and spending more time in nature, which I know is something that honestly all of us need, even if we don't realize it. We spend way too much time on technology. Yeah. Well, so if someone wanted to, live in the community, what would that process look like for them?
Well, usually most people find us online at our website, bigcom.ca, and through there we have what we call the Tiny Homesteader questionnaire. So it's a fairly detailed look at where are you at in this process. Do you have a house already? Are you still looking? What kind of house? What systems are on that? What sort of hookup are you looking for? What kind of community activities and vibe are you generally interested in? Your timing as far as movement, all of those things. So we start with that questionnaire that usually leads into an e-meeting where we spend a half an hour or so just getting to know each other and answering questions about the region or the property, and then we definitely encourage people to visit, to tour the area, and to we have a guest rental here. It's a tiny house on wheels. So for folks that really like the whole idea of living tiny but haven't actually stayed in one, then that's a really good threshold to cross over before making a big life decision in terms of buying a house and living someplace rural like this. And then we offer rental pads, and in the not too distant future, we'll also have long-term lease pads too. So we'll be growing out our community. Right now we've got 4 pads. We'll be adding another 8, so 12 altogether, which kind of fits with the whole, Ross Chapin's idea of pocket neighborhoods, that you've got you've got a large enough community that's not too big and there's space between folks, but you can still see each other and interact, and you've got the social dimension. So we're really advocates for the human scale side of communities, not so much the resort or real estate development or the backyard pad, but that nice in between.
That makes sense. And there are people that are definitely looking for that. Like they want something where they have neighbors, but they don't have too many neighbors. So I feel like what you're doing meets the need for that particular group that does want to feel like they're in like a tight knit community, which it sounds like you all are working hard to establish, which I think is really great. That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. What sorts of challenges have you faced then in building this out? Because like as you're saying, it is kind of a different model. You don't really hear the word permaculture thrown around too often. You really don't hear the word homestead thrown around too often within the tiny house space, at least. So what have been some of the challenges you've experienced in this process so far?
Yeah, well, it's always an adventure, and probably the early challenges were related to the pandemic and the supply chain issues. We had an option to purchase on the property before the pandemic, and we're testing out the idea, to see if people were interested in living tiny, living rural. And then pandemic happened, and everybody was kind of looking to leave the cities, and so we got the project started. We purchased the property in 2020, and then of course it's different contractor crews that came down with COVID or supply chain. We couldn't get certain parts. There was a wildfire one summer that detoured things just as the machines mobilized. So we kind of had a steady stream of challenges. But I'd say in the bigger picture with tiny house communities, especially ones like what we're going for, which is that kind of human scale, is the financing institutions or the investor climate is is a challenge. My background is in software, and those folks are looking for the digital plays, the hockey sticks on returns, and the real estate folks are looking for high density and usually more of a bedroom community around perhaps resort communities or ski hills. And so this in between, which I think is actually going to be one of the larger classes of villages, these human scale regenerative villages, they're really growing in popularity. There's I think a high demand for them, and we're working with others to try to pool funds and investors, people that are aligned with those types of climate related and resilience focused investments into networks of villages like us.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I think, obviously finding the land is a difficult piece of it, and financing is a tough one, here in the States as well too. Like just in general, just if you want to go tiny, it's difficult to find, lenders, depending on the type of tiny house that you're looking for. So I could see where that would be an issue even on a larger scale, and maybe it'll take some time, but I feel like I'm hopeful that, there's going to be a nice collection of investors down the line that will see the value in creating smaller communities, because there's value in just creating communities where people aren't going to move as much. Like lower turnover, I think, can be a great selling point for an investor as well too. Some of the bigger places you might see higher turnover rates because people aren't as happy, or they just don't feel as connected. So there could be that aspect of it too. But since you're kind of in a space, like I talk about this a lot on the channel, but I feel like the tiny house industry is going in quite a few different directions. It'll be interesting to see how it changes in the next 3 to 5 years or so. But based on what you're doing and what you're seeing, what do you think is the future of this sort of like model for tiny house communities? In the U.S. and Canada, wherever you feel comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, well, definitely in Canada, and I think in the States as well. Just North America, I think there really is a groundswell around interest in kind of definitely trading the oversized urban or suburban house for something smaller and probably outside of the city. There's a lot of interest there. People, whether they're empty nesters or couples without kids or individuals without partners that still want the community aspect. There's a really big kind of collective awareness around well-being and work-life balance, and also around self-sufficiency and resilience. And that often attracts people to things like permaculture and to homesteading and like for us, kind of growing or rebuilding some of those important life skills. And just curiosities around things other than screen time work. So I think there's a big movement there. I think I look at it in terms of a stack. It's kind of an operating system for tiny houses or tiny house communities where the house is the base of the stack. And on that level, there's, like, as you know, and all the people you've spoken to, there's so many different interesting types of builders and houses, whether on wheels or foldable or domes or cubes or containers. There's a real wave coming, I think, in terms of factory built prefab homes. And then the next layer up is the edge space around those homes, which is something we're focused on, and improving those hookups and making the environment part of the actual home, that, having the homestead that you can engage in to have your pets around, or, enjoy porch time in the summer, or hook up solar panels or something like that. Then there's the community piece, which, there's all shades of different types of communities, and intentional ones like ours that are, focused on, in our case, permaculture and resilience, but in other cases, it's a whole range of interests or activities. And so really kind of finding your tribe that way on the community side. Then above that is really overlooked and almost absent from real estate developments is the microeconomy. So many people that have approached us, they have a side hustle, or they've got a coaching business, or a podcasting venture that they'd like to pursue around permaculture or trail running or yoga or a whole range of things. And so building in some sort of economic tools like a workshop space or a platform is something a lot of people are looking for. I think that's a big part of the future is reducing the commute even more so that you can do what you really like, the happy money, do that around where you live. And then lastly would be kind of networking these villages within the bioregions or across the continent, because there's no reason to do one-offs or to reinvent the wheel each time, that there is so much knowledge sharing around not just tiny living, but building of these villages and communities, how to do it right and how to vet people or how to direct them to the right types of communities or the right types of structures that they might be interested in. So it's a super exciting time. I think there's a lot of energy coming into this space generally.
No, I agree. I think you bring up a really good point about just sort of starting with the house and then sort of like zooming out from there. I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, for sure. I think especially for like millennials, like those of us that work remotely and, doing a bunch of different side hustles, like I think that is definitely going to be something that communities will have to take into consideration in terms of what types of resources can be built in to help people accommodate, for the different types of work that they're interested in doing. I think that makes complete sense too. I think we're seeing that a little bit with the Airbnb space, like, because we're seeing people, specifically gravitating towards tiny homes just because there's something that you can talk about on your social media, different things like that. So it's definitely picking up. So it'll be interesting to see how all of those things come together and change the different types of, approach that developers have when they're building out these types of communities. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think usually the conversation is just around the house or on the real estate side. It's just kind of like, here's where the development is. Take whoever shows up around you is who you get. And I think those are increasingly being unbundled, that you have to consider house and the environment and the community and also your future of work together. And that's a pretty exciting thing for people to explore and to really kind of dive into to enrich their lives.
Yeah, I think if you can embrace it for what it is, I think, it's just part of adapting and adjusting to what, honestly, because a lot of this is coming from consumer demand. I think consumers are really shaping the way that this industry is changing in a way that wasn't really the case, 10 or 15 years ago when it started out. But now for sure, you have this large group of people that are saying like, I want something that's affordable. I want to be able to have my pets. I want to be able to build a community. I want to have my own little garden, but I also want a community garden as well too. Like, so yeah, people are definitely being more vocal about what they want the entire space to look like around their tiny home, which is not something I think that the industry is used to, but it's a good thing.
And the decluttering, older folks looking to get rid of the stuff that they've accumulated, and younger folks who've never accumulated it, that don't need the space just for storage and are putting an emphasis on things that are more important.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. So what, like someone that's watching right now and they're thinking, okay, I want to do this. I want to live in a tiny house community. Like what do you think they need to keep top of mind? Like what's some advice that you would give to them as they sort of begin the work of figuring out what community makes the most sense for them?
Yeah, I think it's really explore all of those dimensions that I mentioned before. Not just, the finishings on the inside of a house, but kind of the different layers there. That'll serve you well as you make a serious life decision to kind of live rural, or live tiny, live with others. If you haven't experienced living tiny, there's a lot of different guest stays, so you can really see the different builders, actually stay in them overnight, experience some of those different staircases or whatever the innovations are, and see just how big a difference it is to add an extra 4 feet or so. Like, do you need a shorter or longer, or do you want the slightly wider? Is a trailer it, or is it more of a park model? So there's a lot of, and again, even 4 years ago, there weren't as many options on the market to kind of kick the tires and test them out. So there's a lot of those options, and I'd encourage people to do that. Also, as well, with living more rural, it's the idea has a lot of sort of romance to it, but also there's the practicalities of knowing how to to fix systems if they break, or if lines freeze, or if you just regular maintenance around changing filters and so on. That's something that a lot of people haven't had to do. And our advice to renters that we've had here has been, imagine that your tiny house is a ship and you're on the ocean, and you need to understand every system in that ship so that you're, if it breaks for some reason, that you're able to fix it. Because in a city, or perhaps in a shared building like a condo, that's always outsourced and somebody else knows how to do that stuff, but you don't usually have to. But in this case, you often do, and it's a good skill to have. So those would be a few bits of advice.
I think that's really good advice. And I like the ship analogy because you're right. Like, for sure, like if you live in a more densely populated area, there is going to be someone you can call for virtually anything that breaks or you need help with. But yeah, if you're out there on your own, like you really do have to learn how to do that, which I think is great. I think there are plenty of people that are interested in learning these skills as well too, and like wanting to be able to take complete ownership over their home in that sense. So I think that's really good advice for people, just to start learning as much as they can as early as possible. And then, go stay somewhere, go stay in your place, go check out Big Calm Tiny Homestead and go check it out, and, just, get your feet wet, so to speak, so that they, have, as little questions as possible when they actually do make the full decision to move and transition. Because it is a transition. It's a big one. I don't think we realize how big of a transition that is, because you're shifting away from a lot of different things culturally that we've been conditioned to sort of take for granted, I think. So I think that's really good advice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate you for taking the time to chat with me. I'm excited for people to learn more about what you're doing. So link to everything that you're doing are in the video description, website, social media. They can reach out, ask questions, and hopefully come and check it out. It's like a beautiful location. I think it'll be a fun place for anyone to come and stay and spend a few nights and just learn more about homesteading.
Yeah, please do. We'd love to see you. We've got a guest day. It's called the Pocket Getaway. Spring and fall are especially beautiful seasons to be around here. So,
awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mick. I really appreciate it and love what you're doing too.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. All right, that was my conversation with Steve. I appreciate Steve taking the time to walk us through a couple things, talk to us about what homesteading is for those of us who are not familiar, talk about permaculture and this idea of making sure that your community is in line with the land and with nature. So I'm excited for those of you who are interested in going tiny to check this place out. So make sure you click the link in the video description and go check out Big Calm Tiny Homestead in British Columbia. Learn more about what it looks like to go tiny in a little bit more of a rural area. I know a lot of you are interested in that space. You're interested in having your own garden. You're interested in learning more about how to live off the land. So this is a great opportunity for those of you to just go check it out, stay for a night or two, and really see if this is the way that y'all want to go and this is the route that you want to go. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Thank you again so much. Thank you to Steve. Thank you all for watching. And don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.